Voilà, ça y est. On continue tout de suite avec le retail média. 10 ans après l'essor de la monétisation du retail média, qu'a réellement accompli l'industrie, quels résultats concrets, quels modèles ont émergé, où allons-nous? 5 intervenants pour répondre à ces questions. Je vous demande donc d'accueillir sur scène Marc Fischli, Executive Managing Director EMEA pour Criteo, Guillaume Bacuvier, CEO World Panel by Numerator, Romain Rouleau, Group Digital and E-Commerce Director pour Kingfisher, Maurice Priem, VP Monetisation Europe Indonesia à Deleuze, et Doris Povdors, Advisor Chief Marketing Officer, ex-Doc Morix, ex-Flaconi. Merci de les accueillir sur scène.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see so many people in an after-lunch session. We will talk about something very different from beauty, jewelry, and innovation. We'll talk about something which we don't always have time for. We look backwards. We look 10 years ago where we were on what was then the hottest ticket in town in retail. It was the birth of retail media. It is still a very important part of the business models for many retailers, both for bricks and mortars, but also for pure players. And we want to take a step back, look at what was said about this new Shangri-La at the time, and where we have gotten to, what we can learn from the things that did happen, and what we can learn from the things that didn't quite happen yet, right, at the time. So let me go back to 2015, and we look at low profit margins in retail, specifically in grocery retail, very low single-digit EBIT margins at the time. We had the first wave of e-commerce that was just about finished. E-commerce at the time was globally about 7% of global retail sales, so probably where you can start to talk about scale, but still at the birth, right? And we had the view that e-commerce and the data and the direct loop it creates has more opportunities for retailers of all guides to bring to us. With that, of course, the financial community and the street started to look at what opportunity that brings on profit impact around that. And retailers started to look at what their inventory and the data as assets they probably haven't used that much at the time could really truly bring to them. It was a time when we weren't quite clear yet what retail media really was. You had lots of retailers in bricks and mortar at the time which had a lot of stuff already done in store. It was mainly paper-based or carton-based, but there was advertisement in store. And of course, a lot of retailers would have had a CRM system with a system of targeted promotions, as they still do today, right? But it was still a lot of it, mostly paper-driven, coupon-driven, and at the beginning of that revolution. We then seen Amazon to really start kicking this off with a sponsored product offer on digital. It's the first time that somebody like at a good level of scale started to have an inventory that's being used to monetize and create a measurable additional profit stream. Other retailers started to look at that. The usual suspects, I'd say, you know, obviously a Walmart, a Kroger, a Target in the US, or a Tesco, a Sainsbury's, or indeed another Deleuze in Europe started to look into that. At the time, including people of this panel, people started to look at what could this be worth. And at the time we said, okay, this could be, because it's so high margin, up to 30% of EBIT for a retailer at scale. The journey started, people started to invest, and we look at where we are 10 years forward. Just last year, the CFO of Walmart made an announcement that they today have a third of their EBIT driven by advertising. So at least Walmart has fulfilled exactly what was said 10 years ago. Has this been the case everywhere? Clearly, Amazon will probably do at least as good or better. Maybe there's a retailer here or there who is in this order of magnitude. But if we look at the industry, we're clearly not at a third of EBIT yet. So what we're going to do with my panel here is we're going to look at why is this? Why has this worked for some of the players but not for others? What can we learn from them? What do we need to do differently as an industry to really make and fulfill the true opportunity that is monetization through retail media? With that, I would like to introduce you to my panel, but I'd like to ask them to do that themselves. So Romain, if you could please start, introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Romain Rouleau. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Kingfisher, so I lead all the digital e-commerce, marketplace, retail media, innovation activities for all of our banners. We are one of the leading DIY operator in Europe, in France operating with Castorama and Brico Dépôt, in UK with B&Q and Screwfix, in Poland with Castorama, and in Spain and Portugal with Brico Dépôt.
Mic that works. Hello, I'm Guillaume. Actually, the slide should say at this point, former CEO of World Panel by Numerator, because I left a month ago. So World Panel was the consumer panel business sitting in Kantar Group, which was carved out of Kantar and merged with the company in the US, which is why I left. Prior to that, was CEO of dunnhumby, where I did a lot of work on retail media, working with Marc at the time. Prior to that, spent many years at Google, where I was involved a lot in Google's advertising business. So I've been more of an outside observer of retail media from different angles in the last 10 years, and delighted to be here.
Good afternoon. My name is Maurits Priem. I work for Ahold Delhaize. That is a retail company of roughly 100 billion euros. We operate in the US, in Europe, and also a little bit in Asia. And I lead the monetization, so the retail media part for Europe.
Hello, my name is Dorrit. I'm since many years a marketeer by heart. I've run several businesses direct to consumer, including marketplaces, where especially also the retail media piece was something which was on my mind a lot in the past 10 years.
Thanks, everyone. So let's start with that statement that Guillaume, you and I have been on stage 10 years ago in front of audience like these, or in front of some equity analysts, and we talked about this famous 30% of EBIT that it could be, right? What drove at the time that thinking, and where do you think we stand today on this with what you observe?
Right, sounds like my mic is working now, that's great. Well, I think at first, to your point 10 years ago, this was partly driven by early observations of what was going on, what we were seeing, obviously, from players like Amazon, but also the work we were doing with some retailers in Europe, and a bit of theory and the logic that a retailer, if it has an audience on which it has a lot of behavioral data, which a lot of retailers do through loyalty programs and others, if it has ad inventory to sell, either its own or the ability to serve ads on third-party inventory, as everything it can to possibly build a media business, and also privileged access to potential advertisers through its supplier base. So the theory says that a retailer has a great opportunity to be a media player, which is what drove a lot of our beliefs, and one of the big strategic bets we made at the time when we were both at dunnhumby. I think where we stand, and I say this as a humble outside observer, because I do not work in a retailer, and I'll let my panel partners comment, is indeed with some retailers that theory has been proven true and they've taken advantage of that opportunity, and you just quoted some numbers from Walmart, that's one example, and this has become a sizable stream of revenue and profits. Many have tried, but for some it's probably been a disappointment in terms of the actual revenue and profit impact hasn't been as large as we expected. And there are reasons for that. I have some views on that, and I think we'll cover them later. But I think that's where we are. So I think the theory is proven with some, but it hasn't been a widespread industry sea change where every retailer out there has built a massive business. Well, let's go to one of the examples then, Maurits. Ahold Delhaize has been one of the
early adapters of retail media overall, and specifically with your Albert Heijn business in Holland. Where do you guys stand today?
Well, it's large, and it's growing, and it's very profitable. So it's roughly 20 times more profitable than our base business. And we don't disclose the exact number, but we rate ourselves against the benchmarks that we hold, and we say a grocery business should be able to do roughly 1.0%, so 1% of their sales, and roughly 25-ish% of their profit. Whereas a marketplace is completely different, that is leaning way more on sponsored products. Our benchmark is up to 10% of sales and 40% of profit. And so we rate our businesses against our retail media networks against those benchmarks, but based on the mix of how much of that is in-store and how much is online or marketplace. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good, so well on the journey, that sounds
But it's,
like.
it's become a size where it's a relevant part of the business model. And that's the biggest thing that has happened over the last 10 years, because that's what some of us, and you were talking about it before, have said, you know, this is growing towards something which will be a new, relevant part of the business model of a retailer.
Yep.
And it is for us.
Okay, so definitely visible at the C-level, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So Roma, with Kingfisher Group, where are you guys on this journey?
So we are massively accelerating everywhere in Europe. We started this journey 3 to 4 years ago in France. We need to have in mind that basically the non-food business, the non-grocery business is very significantly different from the food one, less mature. So basically we are a few years behind. Also, we're going to talk about it, but there are some differences within the different markets in Europe, UK being by far the most advanced one in Europe. And today we don't disclose in terms of profit, but in terms of target, our target is to reach 3% of our digital e-commerce GMV, represented by retail media. Obviously, the whole scope of retail media revenue, on-site, off-site, data, and in-store being a very big driver for us. So the growth is very significant, very, very significant, but it's also a journey where we need to support both our internal organization and also our vendor, because we do have a vendor base that is a mix of very mature, very well-known brands, which is very close to the grocery business, but in the same time, we also have a large portfolio of non-mature vendors that need to be on board, understand the mechanics, understand the beauty of retail media versus trade marketing.
Yeah, okay, great. But also obviously visible at the C-level, right? Which
yes,
is definitely one of the changes we've observed.
It's part of our 6 top priorities.
There you go.
At group level.
Yeah, okay. Great. Let me stick with the traditional retailers here on the panel for a second. I'll come back to Dorrit in a minute. If you look at the development and the growth of retail media, let's take, for example, the numbers we get from IAB Europe, you can see that the size of some of the US-based retailers is bigger and further developed than it is in Europe, right? What would be your observations, Maurits, on this?
Well, one is maybe a bit of a silly one. It's a mathematical one, is that retail media is Amazon, right, for roughly 75%. That goes both for Europe and the US, almost 75%, stunning number every time that I look at it, is Amazon. So obviously Amazon is rooted in the US, started there, then came to Europe, so that's one of the reasons why we're a little bit behind in Europe. But there's also very fundamental differences, I guess, between US and Europe, is that US has a higher e-commerce share. We already talked about the differences for that. And it's also a bit more tech-focused, whereas Europe is started more from the stores, as you already said. And it's also a bit more a collaborative model. So, yes, a bit behind, but for reasons, yes.
Okay. Romain, would you agree?
Yeah, I fully agree. There is it's not linked to retail media specifically. Fragmentation does exist in Europe for all of our businesses. Like Moritz said, digital penetration is smaller. One critical element for us, and this is why we're also massively investing in this, our 3P business, our marketplace business is growing massively, and we know that the size of the revenue that we're going to get on retail media out of the 3P business is going to be a significant part of our reach, because, as I said, the digital penetration overall, so we just released our Q3 result this morning, we reached close to 21% of e-commerce penetration, which is very significant for our non-food business. But as mathematically, 21 remains 79% in stores, which means for our 1P vendor, our traditional vendors, they will always look at the overall ecosystem, including the store business. So this is why the store advertising space is going to be critical as well.
Yeah, it's very true. We would see this at Criteo as well. The amount of interactions we have with retailers in the European market is much more balanced between in-store and online versus what we see with our American colleagues. Let me turn to Dorrit. You as a pure player retailer, that in-store piece is obviously not there for you. What do you think your situation is versus some of your peers in America?
I think we are very well equipped coming to that question whether we did our cut and whether that is a profitable thing to do. The answer is absolutely yes. It was yes in the healthcare sector, and it was also yes in the beauty sector. So I think we did our fair share. I think what was said earlier, the fragmentation and the acceptance and the understanding what retail media contributes to the media mix. I think this is where we are still making things smaller or less attractive than other bigger players, especially the walled gardens. I think that was the sales pitch we went out with. We said we are lower funnel. We are here at the moment in store or on our page in the online shop when the shopper wants to buy. But this, I would call it performance marketing spend, is just one part of the media budget. And usually the bigger budgets sit in branding. And there was never a story for retail media told that would attract also branding budgets. And I think that is, besides fragmentation, besides the fact that we have issues to get to a unified ID to also measure across the retail media ecosystem or even the wider ecosystem, which is, limiting things. I think retail media has not yet told the full funnel story, and that limits also the budgets which are relevant.
You just mentioned a couple of things as hypotheses why maybe we're not quite there yet at the 30%, never mind where our US colleagues are. You talked about fragmentation, you talked a bit about measurement, you talked about full funnel and the brand budgets. Let me start with fragmentation and stick with you on this. Fragmentation is something that the US would also have, right? I mean, it might be at a higher level, but obviously they're still probably being seen as fragmented. There's a lot of retail media networks you need to cover if you're brand X, and etc. Why is this so hard? It's it's so logical. If you bound yourself together, if you have some things which are all aligned, we might have an opportunity to be more as an alternative for an Amazon or some of the walled gardens. Why is this so hard in retail?
That's the $1 million question. I would say it's really the agreement on a standard, especially an ID standard, and having that as the basis of a measurement and attribution framework. Because if it comes to budget, you will be always compared with. And if you don't have the ROI-driven arguments in place, and that was usually a lack in the retail media space, then it is difficult to argue why the investment should go there. And then also, do you have to bring, in our case, people to the store on page, or do you still need to invest to convert them if they are already there on page, or is that not be done by price? So I think it's still also a little bit of a philosophical, I hope that's the right English word, philosophical debate which goes on, which is probably a bit unique to us.
Okay. Romain, what are you guys doing around this fragmentation question at Kingfisher?
So the first thing is we try to tackle this issue on our internal ecosystem. So we have decided in France to do a retail media network for the two banners, Castorama and Brico Dépôt, to share because we do believe that when we reach to vendors with a common audience, with a common reach, is going to bring more value to our vendors because some of the vendors are common to both banners. So that's one thing. On the overall scope, we are definitely looking at the landscape because I do believe that at one point, I think I heard someone last week telling me that only in the UK, there are already 70 retail media networks in one dedicated country. And like Moritz said, in the end, we all know that the number, 75%, is Amazon. So if you want to compete with 70 people versus one, you need to make sure that you find some way to share some data, to share some audience. Otherwise, you don't play with the same rule of the game. So definitely, I do believe that at one point, there will be some consolidation, there will be some alliances, whatever model. Why is it taking a lot of time? I do believe that it is because it is still a growing, mature, not exactly a mature business today in terms of business model. How are we going to share the business model on something that is in the between the trading side, where basically all the very large retailers in Europe and in the world have already made some alliances on the purchasing side, so that's pretty common. Once you move to the marketing side, it doesn't exist. So how do you build this business model on the marketing side the same way you did on purchasing? That's probably why it has been so slow in terms of development.
Okay, we'll dig a bit on that. Maurits?
In my view, there's 4 things that you can do if you're not one of the very big ones. Yeah, because I think in the end, the winners will take all. And probably the answer is, by the way, you need to do all 4. One is you aggregate, so you team up with others to become bigger and to increase scale. Second, you go niche. And that could be extremely niche, by the way, which could be very, very profitable. Yeah, so just before we came on, I was talking to somebody about Harrods, for example. Yeah, very niche, very profitable, interesting retail media business. Third, you could do programmatic. Yeah, so you just make sure, okay, we're lots of people, but you can buy programmatic. And then the fourth thing you can do is you could go very hard on your trade relation and have your suppliers sign in blood. Now, there's pros and cons to all 4, but probably you need to, if you don't have the scale, then probably you need to do a combination of these 4 things.
Yeah, yeah. It's very insightful, thanks. Dora mentioned as a sort of second element, measurement. This has been one of the pain points, I guess, for most of the people where ultimately the money for retail media comes from, which is the brands. Everyone in the industry pretty much used to mark their own homework, and so it was very difficult for a brand to compare performance with Retail Media Network 1 versus Retail Media Network 2 or technology provider number 3. The industry has gotten themselves together in industry associations, and there are a lot of good steps that are being brought forward. We're not quite there yet. Adoption's not quite there. Maybe Romain, I'll start with you on this one. Where are we as an industry on this, on actually getting to something that's useful and trusted by the people who ultimately pay the money for it, and is, I guess, acceptable for the retailer?
I think we are here in a typical education and acculturation process. When I mean education and acculturation, I do mean that I talk both sides. I talk on the internal insiders, retailers organization, and on the other side, on the vendor side. So basically, if we do want to drive the retail media business at the scale, at the level that we think it could represent in terms of revenue and obviously in terms of profit within our organization, we need to make sure both parties understand the value. If I take an example, if you go to a vendor and use a traditional trade marketing campaign where basically you're going to propose some extra visibility in line with a trading campaign, and in the end, the vendor is going to say, oh, I got a great exposure. If you are not able, which has been the case for 30, 40, 50 years, to demonstrate the exact contribution of the campaign, exactly the same way a Google, a Meta campaign will do on the direct-to-consumer, it used to work. Whether it's not going to work today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, at one point, our vendors are going to say, show me what you deliver in front of the money. And this is just a question of months and years. And this is why we need to educate our internal organization to explain, yes, we were having a specific way of dealing with our vendors, but we need to have this evolve, because otherwise we're going to be behind the curve and they're going to ask for some reporting and some insights that we are not able to provide. So it's really something that goes both ways in order to be productive.
Yep. Guillaume, you've been in a couple of organizations who obviously deliver a lot of measurements to clients. How do you see the industry getting themselves together, and are they making good use of third parties like your former company, Worldpanel?
Well, I guess I'll build a little bit on what Romain and prior to that Maurits was saying. I mean, one thing, it's always good to draw parallels from other more established media channels. And in every established media channel, you always get to a point where there needs to be a universally accepted definition of metrics by which you measure performance, whatever that is, right? Whether it's on TV or radio or online media. And retail media hasn't quite reached that point, but it's an inevitable outcome. And I tend to agree with Romain. I suppose it's a matter of time and acculturation. I would add to that, as a humble outside observer, I think, and this might be a bit of a provocation as well, I think the challenge possibly as well is it is not naturally cultural and obvious for retailers to agree to collaborate with what sometimes are their most direct competitors in what is a cutthroat market. And so whereby, in traditional media, content publishers are okay with the fact that they will syndicate some of their ad inventory with other newspapers or websites who effectively compete for audiences with them because it's in their interest. That industry level kind of mindset of collaboration and syndication and aggregation isn't 100% there. Possibly as well because it intersects a little bit with trade discussions with vendors, which are themselves tense. And for the moment, as a result, it's an industry that has not yet fully adopted some of those, a lot of the implicit cooperation and collaboration that typically exists in media through ad networks, through measurement, in order to create standards and make the act of buying for advertisers much easier as a result.
Yeah, thanks. Let me go on the sort of slight tick here, Maurits, for you, which is in-store, but sticking with measurement. Both you and Romain have talked about how you look at retail media being a broad house, which has obviously a digital element, but also an in-store element. We can all see, if we get our act together as an industry, how we can play to good measurement and comparable measurement on the digital side. But it's been chronically difficult to measure impacts of campaign in store. Where are you guys on this journey, and do you see light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes, lots of light at the end of the tunnel. Actually, I'd like to state that we are also already out of the tunnel. We have solid measurement in place for in-store, and have been working hard in the IAB Europe Councils to make sure that we get to a standardized way of measuring in-store as well. And there's 3 different ways. Well, we won't go into the rabbit hole now on how to do it, but it's very well doable to have incrementality, real incrementality measurement for in-store as well. But you need scale. That's a problem, yeah? So you need a proper scale to do in-store measurement on incrementality, because you will need to have a large pool of stores to compare to. And it shouldn't be the same ones every time, because you want to be comparable to the stores where you ran. So you need 500 plus stores probably to do solid in-store measurement.
Yeah, okay, great. Dora, coming back to you, you set me up nicely with the 3 different elements that we wanted to go into. The last one was getting more into brand budgets. One thing we've observed at Criteo, we work with 230 retailers across the planet on retail media, and we start to see with some of them how the growth rate of the retail media business aligns over time with the growth rate of their .com business. which is a strong indication that we're dealing with trade budgets and not brand budgets, right? So, Dora, you started to go into about we're definitely stuck at the end of at the bottom of the funnel, and therefore in trade budgets. What are your deeper views on how we get more interest from the brand budget side of our brand clients?
We talked about, I heard the word education and understanding, and I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding why retail media should not be capable of attracting brand budgets and sending brand messages. I think what happened is that when we started to sell space, media space on our webpage, which is the lowest part of the funnel you can get. It's the click before the click and the purchase. And I think this made people stick with the understanding, because everybody who went to university, everybody who looks at marketing stuff knows the funnel, and usually you see the funnel and then you see KPIs and you see players serving that funnel step, right? And there's YouTube on top, there's TV on top, and then, it goes down, and then you have Google Shopping, and then very much on the bottom, there's retail media. I have no idea who exactly put it there and why it stayed there, but nobody ever spoke up like Google is doing now and says, hey, we have a mid-funnel and an upper funnel, and we have Google Shopping at the lower end and YouTube at the upper end, and start spinning the story. And I think this is a fundamental issue that sometimes if you put something on paper, it gets stuck there. And for me, retail media got stuck simply not because it cannot serve it, but nobody has, so to say, started doing it. And especially now, if you say you are not only on page, but you go off page. I mean, we, in the past companies I worked for, we could address with our identifier, with Criteo, with LiveRamp, with Pantaleap, we could address even CTV. Now, you tell me TV is the media channel for branding campaigns. So why shouldn't that run via retail media with very much different targeting than doing it in a TV station directly? Mm-hmm. So I think it's really sometimes you are limited in your own imagination, and I think that is what is happening still, that we are limiting ourselves.
But that's an assignment for the retailers as well, yeah? So retailers need to start offering upper funnel. Retailers should learn to speak media language. Retailers should engage into the golden triangle of the advertiser, the agency, and the retailer. There's so many assignments for us to do. And at the same time, there's an assignment for all the marketers. I don't know whether there's marketeers in the house, but educate yourself. Because the funnel does not exist. Sorry. If you follow science...
It doesn't exist, I would agree. It's an ecosystem.
If I get passionate, it gets turned down. No, but if you follow science, science says, how do brands grow? Brands grow through mental availability and physical availability. Exactly. If there is one media channel that can deliver both, it's retail media, not television.
Now I got
not cinema. And now you get me started, yeah? So if there is, retail media is the ultimate way to build brands. And surprise, light at the end of the tunnel. Not last year, beginning of this year, January, we launched a outcome of a survey, 3-year program, 120 different campaigns with 19,000 consumers. And the outcome is that retail media in Netherlands and Belgium builds both brands and conversion.
So here's your assignment for the day from Marit. One thing that you said in there was a bit more understanding, and if I paraphrase, maybe start to act a bit more like a media company rather than only a retailer, right? I come to Guillaume for this. Again, something you and I have had the discussion to discuss many times, and given your background in media, why do you think it's difficult for retailers to make that step?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it brings us back to the comments I was making before. I think one is culture, of kind of thinking of yourself as something very different. I completely agree with Marit that, again, on paper, retail media networks, the big successful ones, have both the data and the inventory to be successful across the funnel. sell advertising to what is called non-endemic advertisers, so people who are not their suppliers. It'd be interesting to see which percentage of retailers actually do it. I think it's a tiny percentage today, but it can be done. The ability to serve offsite. So on paper, retail media has indeed every capability to be a cross-funnel solution. But then you bump into indeed culture, the starting point. It started bottom funnel, and the teams are struggling to elevate themselves. Possibly a lack of understanding of how media in other budgets is sold and bought. Who are the decision makers? In particular, the key role of media agencies and having the right stakeholders in these media agencies who control these budgets, with whom retail media networks really have relationships. And again, I think few of the retail networks have been able to make the cultural shift and made the kind of time and resource investment to truly think of themselves as a proper media player. And then again, comes the intersection with the central role of supplier to retailer relationship in any retailer business model, and the concern that having parallel relationships, one on the advertising side, one on the trading side, which might lead to very different outcomes, that worries people in retail companies. So it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy always to comment as an outsider. I'm not criticizing. I understand it's hard, but on paper, it can be done. And some people, I think, amongst the more successful are getting close to achieving it, right? Yep. But it requires a deliberate effort to get to that.
Thank you. Okay, so look, it's 10 years since that journey started. There's a lot to be proud of. The industry has developed into something meaningful that is clearly, we've heard from the panel today, visible and important at the C-level of traditional and new retailers. So that's a great achievement. We've obviously got some retailers who have been achieving precisely the numbers that we've talked about 10 years ago. But we also still have homework, and we've talked about some of them. Just one more very quick question for every one of you on the panel. If you look forward, and I'm not going to say the next decade, given how fast things move these days, but if you look at the next 12 months, maybe 24, what are the one or two things that you would really want to see, Romain, maybe starting with you?
I'm gonna answer and bounce back on what Guillaume just said. If there is one thing that is really striking in retailers' organization, is when you describe the definition of our vendors, you stop calling them suppliers, but you start calling them customers. Once you switch to this mindset, exactly the same way we had the culture on marketplace, when we started to develop marketplace, we had to explain that they were not our suppliers, they were our customers, and we were charging a service to them. So this is it might sound a vocabulary, but in reality, it is a critical element that we need to drive within the next 12 months.
Here. Brilliant. Guillaume?
Yeah, I think my personal prediction is some of the few retailers that have really made the right bets and the right commitment to retail media will continue growing and benefiting from it. And in a way, I think they will also take advantage of what AI is going to bring to advertising in terms of automation, speed, accuracy. And you still have, in my view, a lot that will try and probably fail a bit or only have disappointing results because of, again, possibly lack of commitment and cultural alignment. At least that's my humble prediction.
Thank you. Maurits?
I could now go into relatively small things. Offsite, non-endemic, in-store, agentic, obviously. But what I really like about this panel is we try and look back 10 years. And then maybe the biggest thing we've done is about change management. Yeah? And there we have a mantra. So to summarize what Guillaume has been expressing, and that is that we always say it's not a banana. Yeah, so depending on what country you're in Europe, probably the biggest SKU in your grocery shop is a banana or a cucumber. And it's very different selling a banana than selling a Chiquita campaign. And there are so many things. So the supplier customer relationship flips around. It's much more profitable, et cetera, and that has big changes. For example, if you're a media player, then your biggest competitor might be Meta instead of your retailer, closed door. And then maybe you start working together. So, not to make it too long, finishing the basics of this change management journey that we're on and getting everybody to understand that it's not a banana.
Thank you. And Dorrit?
Yeah, I see we are up on time, and I don't want to start a big political debate, but I have to say it. because it's really at the bottom of my heart. I would wish for more flexibility in thinking and more partnerships and getting over this battlegrounds we had for the last 10 years. And why am I saying so? I think we are all here, retailers, advertisers, marketeers. We want to do our job and we want to earn money. And we are living in democratic Europe. And I think part of this is the open internet and the free ecosystem. And retail media is holding that piece together. And if this ecosystem is already not as much scaled in many senses as we wished for, now with ChatGPT and other players coming in, there's not going to be more media budget out there in the next years. It will just now go also in more and different channels. So more fragmentation, more complexity, more pressure. So let's get our shit together and team up and get this ecosystem to work for Europe and for democracy, because if there is no media Vielfalt and plurality, yeah, I don't know why we should stay marketeers. So sorry for that was longer than one sentence, but I think it should really come from our heart that we get over the nitty-gritty and the measurement and the attribution, and that we get just this ecosystem to work as a free park and not a walled garden.
Yeah, let's remember all that as an industry we have a lot to gain, and the power of partnership, is something to think about. With that, let me thank our panel and thank you as our audience. Thank you very much.
On revient pour la séquence